Good morning and a very warm welcome to this special edition of the DGAP morning briefing. My name is Guntram Wolfen. I'm the director of the German Council on Foreign Relations. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Deputy Prime Minister Olga Stefanishyna. Thank you so much for coming. Mrs. Stefanishyna has a distinguished career in Ukraine's Ministry of Justice, among others, behind her, before having been appointed Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration in the Shmyhal government on 4 of June of 2020. She was also ranked as one of the most influential women in Ukraine. So a very warm welcome. It's really a great pleasure and honor to host you today. The outcome of Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine is unfortunately still uncertain. Russia has significantly ramped up its war economy in the last 2 years and is set to further increase military spending next year. The current level and type of Western support could mean that the war is heading for a stalemate or even worse. That the head of Ukraine's armed forces recently called the war positional portends either a long, bloody conflict or a forced settlement that would reward Russia's aggression. None of these scenarios serve the interests of Ukraine, the interests of European security, the global order, or Germany for that matter. It would be felt across Europe and the wider democratic world if Ukraine were not to succeed in winning this war. Today, we want to hear from the Deputy Prime Minister, not just about sort of the war in itself, but also about the broader setting, the long-term security guarantees, as well as, of course, prospects for EU integration of Ukraine. And then engage in a debate with my colleagues Ben Tallis and Anastasia Pokyumban, and of course with you, our esteemed audience. Before giving you the floor, dear Deputy Prime Minister, let me, however, first thank our team, Yulia Loeva, by the way, Ukrainian, head of events, and the entire events team, as well as the communications team and my colleague Ben Tallis for having organized this debate at such short notice. Never has this debate been more important than now. Ukraine and European security is at a critical juncture. Thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister, for being with us. We look forward to your keynote and then to the debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues and friends. Many familiar faces. It's a great pleasure for me to start my traveling around Europe. I had a very important meetings of the EU leaders in December from Berlin, the capital of many important things and in important developments in a history. There are so many things you know about Ukraine and about Ukrainians, and there are so much more challenges which we are about to face in the next months and probably years. And we understand that gradually, the longer the war is lasting, the more questions being raised. We hear we hear here and there a lot of questions about what is the mood in Ukraine, and this is basically the first question I received today over my meetings in a chancellery. What is the mood in Ukraine? How do you feel? And I think our answer to this question is the answer to many other questions you hear in your domestic discourse. In Ukraine, nothing has changed. We still have a war. We're still fighting the war. We're still defending ourselves. Our people are still dying. Our armed forces are still fighting. And our resolve is the same. Yes, we're tired. Yes, we're exhausted. We're frightened with the horrors of war. But the choice we made once on 24th of February and 10 years ago when the Revolution of Dignity started has not changed. We are a country which will fight for its democracy, freedom, for its sovereignty, for the ability to live our lives the way we always lived and wanted to live since we gained the independence and since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So in Ukraine, things are not changing. What is changing is that from Kiev, we are watching how things are changing in a global narrative. We see the media headlines about the war fatigue, about helping Ukraine to keep fighting, not winning, about messages saying that the war is lasting too long. So maybe we should make a revision of everything we did and leave Ukraine alone in that regard. And unfortunately, this is something I heard in a couple of major European capitals already. And these questions are even been formally put in on a table by some unexpectedly very well knowers of how it's been under Russian occupation, of those countries who have been under Russian occupation decades ago. They're putting this question. So nothing has changed in Ukraine. Things are changing in those countries who are standing with Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale war. And I think it's really important that we keep being focused on things which needs our attention. For Ukraine, the focus has not changed. We really need to win, and we really need to survive throughout the war. And this requires everything what it takes, what is needed to reach these two goals. Now we understand, believe me, on 24th of February, every morning waking up, I was thinking of two things. First is that, thanks God, I'm alive and my family is alive. My friends and colleagues are alive, and somebody has died. Somebody has not survived this another day. But the second thing we always knew is that we have to keep on doing everything we can every day, as long as it takes, to bring back our lives we were standing on the Maidan 10 years ago. The fight and the choice we have made. And 10 years of this road has brought us to where we are. On one side, ahead of a decision to start the accession talks and become the member of European Union. On the other side, fighting literally with the arms, with the ammunition for its choice and a freedom. And in that regard, we, of course, were waiting and expecting that the war will be over soon, that we will succeed on a battlefield, that we will accumulate necessary military assistance, that the Russia will step away under the pressure of the sanctions. It is all happening. But the only thing we've learned over this more than 600 days is that we should not count the days. The support and the commitment and the resolve should not depend on a day of war. It should be a decision, and it should not be calculated by the days. And if we will be looking from this perspective, we will see a huge, huge evolution. Just less than 1 year ago, President announced the 10-piece formula on the G20 summit. It was just a proposal on the table out of 10 points. And everybody thought that the other day there will be a summit of leaders and the leaders might agree on this 10-piece formula, but things went a different way. We see now all 27 EU leaders unanimously supported peace formula. All 31 NATO allies supported peace formula. We have 3 rounds of consultations at the level of the security advisors with more than 50 countries on the table, including China, Asia, and Africa. We have an agreement that all those working on this document stand firmly on the principles of the UN Charter related to respect of the territorial integrity and sovereignty. We are ahead of decision on managing the confiscated assets of the Russian Federation. We have a very strong state from transatlantic to Europe and Asia on inability to apply any nuclear blackmail. And these are just the 3 points of the peace formula. We have a discussion on the exchange of the prisoners of war, and it is happening. While still more than 4,000 Ukrainians, both civil and military, are the prisoners of war in the Russian Federation. So we should not wait for the date. We should see things evolving. It might take longer, but the progress is there. And whenever we hear the discussion on the future negotiations, nothing has changed. It's really clear that the negotiations are the normal effect and the outcome of every war, but the principles matter. And the principles are set out in these 10 points. And the principles and the peace formula and the restoration of the security in Europe will be the next step expected from European Union. And that's why we are so committed to the decisions we expect on 15th of December, because what comes after the end of the war? What comes after the victory? We need to preserve the victory. We need to preserve the peace, and we need to start the new wave of the evolution of the Europe, of the broader Europe, with everybody on board, and the security is guaranteed by the Union, by the new Union, reformed, with a broader group of players and all European approach indeed. So this is a very clear vision on our side. And we do not count the days. We count by actions and the progress. The other day will come, and the other progress we will have on a 10-piece formula. The other day will come, and we will present you the future force design of the Ukrainian army. We will present and show you the vision of Ukrainian sovereign defense. We have already implemented all the decisions of the Vilnius summit in NATO. We have prepared the new program of interoperability with the alliance. We are there. We are moving forward. We have managed to reform our country throughout the war with all the setup of institutions related to the rule of law, accountability in place, reforms done. Country is running. We still need a lot, but we stick to a big picture every day. We do not count by days. And in that regard, it's very important for us to have this feeling and clarity in every capital. The one lesson we learned from the Vilnius NATO summit is that it's so much important that the decisions of the leaders are backed up by the public opinion, backed up by parliaments, and backed up by a broader perception. We see now the tendency in many capitals, the tendency to be more focused only on domestic issues because the leadership, the commitment, the call of time and history requires serious decisions, serious leadership, and serious responsibility. This is a fantastic platform for populist and radical groups to raise their voices, to get their parts, their shares in the parliaments and in the governments. And this is a challenge. This is a challenge. And that's why we should explain and stick to the bigger agenda, to stick to the bigger picture and stick together. And speaking about the unity, it's not only about being unanimous in some decisions. It's about talking to each other, convincing each other, and helping those who still in doubt or who are trying to veto the future of Europe. Speaking to them and taking the responsibility of this veto, because speaking of the veto of one country on 15th of December, this will not be a veto of one country. This would be the irresponsibility of the others, those who were not building this consensus, who were not working on focusing on a bigger picture, on the future of Europe. So I guess we all understand what I'm referring to, and this is how we read it, this is how we treat it. a part of it, there are so many things that do not come unnoticed in Ukraine. First, it's an enormous gratefulness of Ukrainian government, of every Ukrainian who have been warmly hosted in Germany since the beginning of war. Thousands and thousands of Ukrainians who are really found a shelter in Germany, across many parts of the Germany, their families, those who cannot come back so far, the military and financial support which has been provided to Ukraine. And we know how it always been complicated. Such a great pleasure. It has always been complicated to seek a consensus for decisions on the military support. Nobody would have imagined that the German tanks will be on Ukrainian soil, defending the freedom and democracy. This, from the perspective of the rational thinking and a discussion, this is totally not rational, but this is what is needed. This is what it takes. And if it takes more tanks, if it takes more decisions on terrorists, if it takes more decisions on air defense, as long as it takes, this decision should be taken. I understand that this is part of the complicated discourse, but again, nothing has changed in Ukraine in terms of our resolve and commitment. We understand that the failure of Ukraine is a domino. You've already seen in the media, and we have received this information even earlier, that Russia is playing on its ordinary playbook, but the scale is only growing. With a full scale, with the annexation of Crimea and the occupation of Donbass, 10 years after we saw a full-scale invasion. Now what we see that there's an accumulation of more military capacity to another military attempt to gain the power, to put its stand on our world, on our life, and it's not limited by the borders of Ukraine. And this is a challenge. And the only message I am really keen to bring to you is that you should never doubt in Ukraine. We have never been letting you down. We have stood on the streets wrapped in the European flags, dying for it. 10 years after we are there, Russia has been cutting the gas, lowering the pressure in the pipeline. Our soldiers, what they do, they protect the pipeline and the transit to Europe with their lives. You have not faced the effect of this blackmail to Ukraine. We have been deterring. We have been faithfully implementing the association agreement, and we become a faithful part of the free trade area. We become part of the European internal market in many endeavors. And we have shown our strong commitment to deliver on political criteria for us to be able to make a decision to open the accession talks. It is vital because the new financial assistance is needed to survive and support the Ukrainian budget, to proceed with the enlargement reforms, and for that you need clarity. And this clarity is brought by the decision to start the accession talk. We need to preserve the positive momentum of the enlargement, which has been revived basically by Ukraine applying for membership on the fourth day of war. And we have been the driving force of the positive energy of enlargement. And now within more than a decade, the Western Balkans really hear the message from European Union that actually you are going to be a member of European Union, and this is for sure. And whatever is needed to make it happen is done and will be done. And we really need to preserve this momentum. So I want to thank you all for being here today, for being vocal and public, for helping Ukrainians and helping us to be heard around the globe. And I just want to say that there's no time to think of something else. We really need to stay focused, and I hope you will help us to make all of it happen. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister, for these very clear words, these visionary words, and the strong plea to believe in Ukraine. I mean, you've mentioned so many topics that I dare not summarize, but I mean, let me say one word ahead of the European Council on December 15. I mean, if Hungary would get away with a veto, it would be a failure of the European Union, in my opinion, a failure of on the European Union to support Ukraine at this critical juncture. So this veto cannot be allowed to pass through, in my view. And if we can think about ways of dealing with the veto, I mean, the European Union does have possibilities to avoid that such a veto actually limits its action, including the possibility to suspend voting rights, which is, of course, a very fast step, but is something that, in my view, given the severity of the situation, is something that should be considered at least. And if I may add, a failure because of Hungary would be also a betrayal on the Hungarian history. I mean, we should not forget the 1956, right? I mean, so Russian tanks were there, right? And Russian tanks were squashing the Hungarian resistance. And, you know, everybody studying the history of Eastern Europe should remember what kind of Russia, what Russia is doing and has been doing. At the time, it was the Soviet Union, but it was essentially the Kremlin. And so we should be under no illusion that deterrence and clear support of Ukraine is really in our interest and not just in Ukrainians' interest. And so I think this is, I mean, perhaps just reflecting on one point that you made. But let me get my two colleagues to add a few quick remarks, and then we want to open up for questions with the audience. So Anastasia, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Guntram. And dear all, first of all, thank you for this invitation. And it's an honor to speak here together with the Deputy Prime Minister, Stefanishina. I just returned from Brussels this week, and earlier last month, I was in Ukraine, not only in Kiev, but also in Chernihiv and Borodyanka. And I can say that this is yet another very critical period for Europe's sustainable support for Ukraine, in terms of enabling it to defend itself in a prolonged war, and in terms of political support for its EU membership prospects. We know that at the moment there is no vision on where is the end of it, and Ukraine must either gain a substantial technological advantage from the West or witness a transformation in Russia. But the consensus is clear: with the current Russia, there cannot be negotiations. And the fear of Ukraine fatigue and calls for a ceasefire are real, but would come at very great cost for both Ukraine and the EU. Russia would benefit from a prolonged, slow-paced war, allowing time to fortify forces and secure ammunition. The cost of it would be just very high for all of us. On 8 November, the EU Commission proposed initiating accession talks with Ukraine unconditionally. This is very important, I think, to mention. It's really an unconditional proposal, and it's a groundbreaking decision that underscores the necessity of Ukraine's integration. And at the December summit, the EU leaders will again decide on the financial aid for Ukraine and on the recommendation to open these talks for Ukraine and along with Moldova, my home country. But this decision requires unanimity, and there is an increasing risk that they might be blocked as member states squabble over tight budgets, as Guntram has mentioned, but also in EU internal reforms and demands by Hungary that have nothing to do with Ukraine. I think some of us have seen the letter Hungary sent, and it's, I mean, I think it's looking very bad. And there is a need, the countries have a need to respond to various domestic concerns, such as migration. And I mean, this also includes Hungary's opposition to, or the desire to block the 50 billion aid for Ukraine facility, and to rather push for a strategic discussion about the future of the EU. Additionally, there is an attempt by a group of member states led by Austria to link decision on Ukraine to opening membership talks with Bosnia, with the argument that Balkan candidates can also deserve some geopolitical reward, even if not fulfilling the criteria. And amidst all of this, the EU is losing sight of the big picture. Support for Ukraine is being undermined by a growing list of priorities, shift in domestic politics, and by divided attention. To ease some of the pressure, the Commission proposed for Ukraine, and along with it for Moldova, a two-step process. First, a political decision, in principle, to open membership talks with both countries already now in December and without further conditions. In the country reports, which are part of the enlargement package, this is argued in the basis of the results achieved by Ukraine and the reforms that Ukraine is taking. Secondly, adopting the so-called negotiating framework in March next year, by which time the Commission will report back to the European Council on the remaining key measures. I mean, and I think this is another danger because we have two councils where some countries have a chance to block the next step. And I mean, there will be more opportunities for this. So it's a process that can really get sidetracked and we should not lose attention on this. And perhaps Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina can explain to us later whether this also creates the risk that the whole decision, everything will be just postponed to March. Unfortunately, this is also what we've heard at some consultations. However, in this case, Germany, as the largest EU member state, should play a pivotal role in creating common ground for a both positive decision on the accession talks in December, but also take a leadership role in driving the support for Ukraine. Germany is supporting Ukraine's path to the EU, and it's also is a crucial military supporter by being the second supplier of weapons. I believe in this regard, Germany could also do more by engaging with the other member states to further drive this agenda. The urgency of Ukraine's EU integration is apparent. However, while there is a momentum within Ukraine, the same cannot be said about the EU internal reform process, which could prepare us for the enlargement. A debate on the EU reform should have started earlier, and there must be a sense of urgency within the EU to match Ukraine's progress. However, it is mostly absent in the member states, it's absent among population, and we don't read about it in the media. And I think this is our homework to do. Following November's decision, also at the DGAP and within the project we managed with the Eastern Partnership, we facilitated a discussion with the European Commission about the enlargement package and how this should proceed forward. We are also very lucky to have great partners in Ukraine, and I would like to thank them all again for monitoring and outreach work also in Berlin. And one last point is that Ukraine's EU integration will also intrinsically be linked with the reconstruction and recovery. We should not forget about this. While challenges abound, war refugees, the ongoing mobilization and war losses compound the shortage of human capacity. The EU could support Ukraine in identifying schemes for the return of refugees when conditions permit. In this regard, more support is needed in defining a new economic model for Ukraine as the war continues and after. And there is the understanding that Ukraine's EU integration won't be easy. As also highlighted in the enlargement report, Ukraine has achieved progress, both judiciary and anti-corruption measures. And while there is still work to be done, the significant achievements should be taken into consideration. Ukraine's vibrant civil society serves as a driving force to maintain accountability and transparency, also in times of war. In conclusion, Germany and the EU member states should continue support for Ukraine and for our country to win the war. And more work should be done to prevent Ukraine fatigue and to emphasize that there is no other viable alternative than winning the war. And the decisions made in the coming months will not only shape Ukraine's future, but also EU's and EU's geopolitical ambitions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anastasia, for this very clear perspective on the EU dimension and also the EU accession process. Before going back to the Deputy Prime Minister, I do want to bring in our colleague Ben Tallis. And, you know, really, Ben, I would love you to speak a bit more to the war and, of course, to the need and the need to support Ukraine in that endeavor. I mean, just to say, of course, Germany has announced, and the German Defense Minister Pistorius has announced to double the support to Ukraine, but we have currently a very difficult budgetary situation where of course the finance minister just said, I think yesterday, that the next years will be years of further savings, budgetary savings, and I can say only that you can save, but there are wrong savings and good savings, and saving on security in the current geopolitical situation, in my view at least, would be a mistake. But Ben, what's your take?
Thanks very much, Guntram, and thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina, for such stirring remarks that I think reminded us all of both the context and the stake that is involved in Ukraine's victory. And we have to really ask ourselves, Guntram, exactly where are the savings we need to make and where are those savings we cannot afford to make? It is a false economy to save now on support for Ukraine. It will cost us far more to get that right in the long run in Europe as well as in Ukraine if we don't do it now. Much as the Deputy Prime Minister said, it's not a matter of counting days. We shouldn't be counting euros for the amount of support we've given to Ukraine. We should be counting the progress we are making to give Ukraine what it needs to win. It is as simple as that. Ask ourselves, do we stand with those who seek to veto Europe's future, be they in Budapest or be they in Moscow? Or do we stand with those who are actually fighting for our democracy and freedom, as the Deputy Prime Minister said? And I think it's important, and this is one of the reasons that we convened this discussion today. We don't think this message has quite got through into some circles of policymaking here in Berlin, but also in other capitals around Europe and in the wider public. We often hear the phrase, as long as it takes, but as the Lithuanian Foreign Minister Landsbergis recently said, what is the it in as long as it takes? Instead, we should be thinking, whatever it takes to win. And why should we win? Well, the costs for Ukraine of not winning, I think, are clear to everybody on a humanitarian level, on the difficulties it would pose for reconstruction, on the incentive it would provide for refugees to stay where they are rather than return to Ukraine. And don't forget that 60% of the money that Germany has spent so far on supporting Ukraine has gone on supporting refugees here in Germany. That's a cost that doesn't improve our long-term security or theirs. It's not an investment, it is a cost. We should be finding where are the investments in this, and investing in Ukraine's victory is one of those. So why is that also important for the rest of Europe? Well, if we reward rather than properly defeat and deter Russia in Ukraine, this raises the threat to all of us. Does anyone think Russia's imperial ambitions will be sated with Ukraine? Does anyone think that any kind of negotiated settlement with Putin could be trusted and wouldn't be used as a pressure point to further weaponize global flows against us, to further weaponize our own weakness against us and our timidity against us, our hesitance? If we don't show proper resolve in Ukraine, forget about trying to get to 2% of GDP now, which we are struggling to do here. Think about how we would get to 3.5% of GDP on defense spending. Cold War levels of defense spending. That would then have a significant impact on the savings that would need to be made in other areas. Winning the geopolitical competition and mastering our ecological transition, our green transition, is not an either or. They both need to be done. But if we don't get the security situation right, we won't have the money to master the green transition in a proper way, because we will have to spend on more security in future. So spending now a smaller amount would save a huge amount in future. And this is the thinking that I don't think has penetrated the places it needs to get to. This failing to support Ukraine to win would also be bad for global order. Stalemate, positional war, rewarding Russian aggression would send a signal to Tehran. It would send a signal to Beijing. It would portend further instability in the Middle East, and it would make a conflict over Taiwan more likely. All of that distracts American attention from Europe. It takes American resources from Europe. What does this mean? It means we would again need to spend more and more quickly to actually achieve the necessary deterrence against a Russia that would be emboldened rather than cowed. As well as the costs for global order, and this is my last remark, this would be particularly bad for Germany, which relies on that global order. It relies on the global commons that it underpins, and it relies on the liberal norms that underpin it. But Germany is also grossly underprepared because of the failure to spend on defense in the past. Germany would have to catch up and catch up quickly. We've seen the dangers of spending too quickly as well on defense, on energy, on strategic energy measures, and so on. Germany would again have to host refugees for longer. But there is another way. The other way is to properly support Ukraine to win. And there is much more we can give to make that happen. Don't believe the counsels of despair. We haven't yet given anything of the air power that Ukraine needs to achieve the kind of air superiority that would make Russian logistics untenable, that would make Crimea untenable for the occupiers, that would first of all help us win the winter and then go on to win the war. And that's precisely what we should do today. And I hope we've gone about making the costs of not doing that a little clearer, but also why we need to lock in the benefits of winning through EU and NATO integration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I mean, just Well, Deputy Prime Minister, I mean, I think you've heard too much agreement on this panel with your position. So let me ask you sort of a question from those that are more skeptical. And you know, there is a certain school of thought in Germany which believes that by giving more to Ukraine, we might run the risk of further escalation of the war and, you know, a further deterioration of the situation. And instead of giving more military support, we should be going for a rapid negotiation and a rapid conclusion of the situation in the hope that a further escalation and, you know, not even necessarily a nuclear, but even a massive further escalation can thereby be avoided. This view is, it's not my view, just to be very clear. It's a view that is quite strong in this country. It has supporters in many political parties, in some more than in others. How would you reply to that point very specifically? Because I think that's a sort of the crucial point. Why? I mean, it might be other reasons, but it's certainly one reason why some German policymakers have been more hesitant than many of us thought they should be in sending tanks or sending other weapon systems. I mean, it took many months to convince the German government to actually send the Leopard 2 that you praised. And of course, the Leopard 2, if had they been there earlier, would have made a difference at the moment when you had a sort of strategic breakthrough in the north. So it was, I mean, time matters in a war, and time matters in a war, but there's this hesitancy, and this hesitancy has to do with fears of escalation, among others. I mean, there might be other reasons. And so how do you respond to that worry?
Thank you so much. We even named this kind of narratives. It's not only about it's about the negotiations, it's about the more military support, more escalation. It's about even elections in Ukraine. This is, I've been to Vienna yesterday, and somehow I had to spend half of the day explaining that the very fact that you see that the country is functioning, it doesn't mean that we're back to the normality. We're in a Ukrainian normality, living in a war. So we named this phenomena a phenomena of delayed solutions. It's a huge cluster of ideas which allow to delay discourse, to put out of the focus what is important, and just to say something which will allow everybody to feel comfortable in doing nothing. So this could be materialized in different narratives. Now, point by point, we need tanks, we need long-range artillery, we need air defense. Why? Because of this assistance, we avoid the massacre. Because of this assistance, you do not see thousands and thousands of civilians and soldiers simply dying on a daily basis, because human and life force is the ultimate value in Ukraine. People are the ultimate value. And this is the last resource we use to fight against Russians. And you know that it's different on the other side, but we do not care about the other side. They are on our soil. They made their decisions. They send thousands and dozens and hundreds of thousands of troops just to die with the order of no return going forward only. This is their decision. This is the way they do the war. But we defend ourselves, we deter, and we deoccupy our land. And we do it in a way to protect people, to save civilians, and to make sure that the most capable and the honored sons of this country are alive. And it is 21st century, and it doesn't count a success if you got the inch of the land and the thousands of people died, civilians and the military. This might be another inch of land, but this is not a success. This is a tragedy in a country. That's why we need tanks. That's why we need long-range artillery. That's why we need drones. That's why we need technologies. That's why we build the roadmap on innovations with NATO to make sure that we are advancing on a battlefield in the spirit of the best values and in the best possible result. And basically, this message also heard in the Ukrainian ears, as you also would suggest that a small, old Soviet army should fight against the big Soviet army. It is not so. We do not have a chance like that. We are really fighting with the most sophisticated advanced elements of the NATO military systems. We are the front line of all the advanced technologies which have been applied and invented in Ukraine. And this is the only way to survive. This is the only way to bring something positive on a battlefield. So on the other side, military support is important, but it's just part of a bigger picture. We need that to stand. Ukraine is now part of the bigger picture. What we do is that we preserve the values on the battlefield. We do our job. We stand for Europe. We stand for the values, for the rules-based order, and we should not really adjust to this word just because we hear them every day. You know, just let's remember the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall. This was not a very well sophisticated and work strategy agreed at the budget or in the parliaments of all European Union, and there was no consensus on the collapse of the Soviet Union, of the Berlin Wall. This was a result of a long-term commitment, of a persistence, of a faith, and of a faith, right? And one day this happened, but it is equally important what happened next. What would happen if after the fall of Berlin Wall, you heard that, well, European Union thinks that part of the Germany is not ready, you need to do reforms. So you can spend another 15 years. We will be looking for you, assessing, and like you have been in part of the Soviet Union, so NATO is not the way to go. There's no security conditions for that. Let's just imagine if things would go a different way, and if all the world in Europe would not be standing, backing up the choice you have. The other day, the same you will see in Ukraine. It might take time. Again, as long as it takes. Let's not count by days. We will be there. It's a matter of persistence. And probably the last thing for those, let's say, colleagues speaking about this kind of messages, we do our job. Do not say thank you when you see the secured grain corridor from the Black Sea, which has not been secured by Turkey, by UN, or by Russia. It is Ukrainian armed forces who threw Russian warships on the Bay of Sevastopol, and they do not show up. So don't thank again for what we did, and we did it to ensure and show everybody that we are a reliable partner. We're not letting down. And if we are responsible for the food security, we do our part. And we always succeed when we are persistent and committed. Whenever Ukraine can do it itself, it is done. Whether it's reforms, whether it's something on a battlefield we can show, but whenever we need help, please stay patient and persistent, and we will succeed.
Well, thank you so much. We have a bit of time for a few questions, so please raise your hands. And I see a gentleman there. Can we have a microphone? Gentleman there, then the lady here, and the gentleman here, all the way at the end. Yeah. And please, a question ends with a question mark. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you so much, Gary Purushkin, German economic team. I have a question on financial aid. We see all the challenges in the US, in Germany, and also the uncertainty about the EU facility. So how do you see, to all experts and Deputy Prime Minister, how do you see to overcome the challenge of using Russian frozen assets for financing the budget of Ukraine, but also the reconstruction? Thank you.
Thank you. I would say we collect always three. The lady here, please.
Thank you. Hello. Hello, my name is Maria Paz Lopez. I'm a Spanish journalist based in Berlin from Spanish newspaper La Vanguardia. You mentioned you are on a tour in Europe, and I would like to know if you are going to Madrid also or not. And considering the various types of allies within the European Union, I would like to ask, what do you expect specifically from countries like Spain, who are, you know, geographically distant from the core issues in Central and Eastern Europe, and maybe also emotionally distant? Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps, yeah.
Yes, thank you for your comments today. It's very interesting. I have a question, which is also to see what you think. It's also sort of a suggestion. It seems to be this problem, like with military, like say even artillery shells. The order goes out in the European Union, it gets spread over all the members. So each company gets an incremental increase. We can do that just by running a little longer, not by really increasing production. And what's our guarantee in case the war ends? Now I look at Germany here where we are, and you come and talk to them. Germany has more productive capacity for machine tools to build new assembly lines than all of China, than all of the United States. If Germany decided to, well, militarize in a way, right? They could make tremendous numbers. The problem is, I don't think the pressure has to be from your government, I think, on particular places that have capacities. There's one or two other countries that have these capacities. And also, what's the guarantee for the company? Like Mr. Biden invoked the War Powers Act. So they'll be paid no matter what. And we don't have that situation in Europe somehow. So my question is maybe a different way of focusing your, what do you think?
Wonderful, thank you. And indeed, this issue of ammunition production is a really a big issue. And in my view, the current budgetary uncertainty in Germany is again creating, also uncertainty as to the long-term prospects of German military spending, thereby making it more difficult to actually ramp up production, right? So I think it's a big issue, and it's quite unfortunate that we haven't really solved this issue, even though we all knew about this and we're writing about it a year or more ago. I mean, a lot has happened, but just not enough. But perhaps you want to react to the frozen asset, the Spanish question, and the ammunition question.
Thank you so much. On financial support, there's a sequence of decisions which, in case of success, will allow us to have a strategic clarity for the whole next year in terms of macro-financial stability, performing our plans on the GDP growth, and also related to recovery, investments, and insurance. So first and foremost, the major package of decisions is 15th of December. So the decision of the 50 billion package for 4 years, which is part of the macro financial program, part of the loans and enlargement finances, which would also have a multiplication effect. This decision taken gives a very positive spirit to the future decision to be taken in DC by the Congress on the financial support of Ukraine. This is a very interconnected issues. The European stand, which would definitely affect the mood and the spirit of the US support on all the other related to that. Secondly, the frozen assets. There is a decision on the table. It will be considered in December. There is an understanding what are the immediate costs could be released, and I think we are really close to that decision, and it's very important. And some of the countries like Canada and Belgium has already taken this decision, and this individual approach is important. And this is also part of the answer to the question from the Spanish colleague. Yes, Spain is not a direct neighboring country of Ukraine, but we are part of this union. You know, we're all part of Europe. If there are some things which do not really affect emotionally on a daily basis, but there are so many common things on our table, and especially now that Spain is in the presidency of European Union. I think it is there, but we have already been in Spain. Our president was in Granada, right? And there's been a lot of very substantial discussion taken, and we're really happy that Spain is on board. And probably on a third question, really not going into many details. That's a challenge. That's the question we hear from time to time. We understand very clearly that even after the end of the war, after the victory, the scope of needs will be still high, because we would need to build an effective defense, and we would need to build the defense capacity all around Ukraine, and we need to relaunch the sustainable armed forces, and that will require a military capacity. It might not be the assistance, but the potential and the industrial potential will not be going lower. And I think it's now a all-European discourse, and I think that the new European Commission after the election next year would prioritize the defense industry as an industrial policy. And I see a huge perspective there, and I think that this would give the new impetus and the answer to many questions you're raising right now.
One very brief comment that I think unites the questions that we've had and some others as well. It depends if you see this primarily as a challenge or an opportunity. The fact there are Russian assets to use is an opportunity, should we seize to take it. The ammo production orders, military production in general, is a huge opportunity to save ourselves, to ready ourselves for that more difficult future that we face. Enlargement is the geopolitical opportunity of a generation for the EU, and that goes as much in Madrid as it does in Chisinau and in Kiev, as well as in Warsaw. And it's about understanding this as an opportunity. Ukraine should be seen as the frontier state of our better future, be that in a technological sense or be that in a geopolitical sense. And that's what we have to seize upon and really make real for more of our people, as well as more of our decision makers.
Wonderful. I do want to take perhaps one more question, and then you also have a chance to quickly react. So perhaps the gentleman there.
I'm Mohammed Magdam, Egyptian journalist here based in Berlin for Shroq newspaper. I was gonna ask you about last June there are African leaders met with Ukrainian president to discuss peace initiative. And before that, China initiative for peace. And we don't see any progress for this initiative or for this peace efforts. What challenges that prevent peace in Ukraine? As you know, African countries suffering from this economic crisis because of this war. And they want to end this.
Thank you. Very important question, this peace initiative. And perhaps one more question, and then we stop really. If we can get the mic here to, sorry.
Hello, my name is Siegfried Seidel. I'm a lawyer and long member of DGAP. Some months ago, there have been a discussion about a statement from a member of the NATO headquarters. And that was the point that he said, long term, there could be an outcome that Ukraine is a partition, and the western part will become then NATO member. What do you think about this?
Okay,
long term.
Thank you. So two important questions. So Anastasia, you perhaps you come with you wanted to say something also, and then okay. So then we perhaps go directly to you and finish it off because we are already at the end of our time. So thank you.
Thank you. And on a peace formula, very shortly, I gave a lot of understanding in my remarks, but look, there's no major challenge. It's just a time and a patience that we should reserve first. Everybody are over the table. Egypt, African countries, China, everybody. China has made its proposal. It's on a table within discussion on a 10 piece formula plan. It's not a consensus which could be built over one day. So it's a long-term process and a gradual progress that we see. The arrangement, the agreement between everybody that the UN Charter is the basis for any dialogue, which is about territorial integrity, sovereignty, and respect for the borders, right? This is clear to everybody. No nuclear blackmail, reparations, and many others. The major thing is that keep on being focused and engaging into this dialogue. And again, the consensus on this peace formula and the peace talk and the principles of the peace in Europe would affect globally every conflict around the globe. This would be the golden standard of solution. The other standards we see now, and we try to invent something new. So it would be very good if you could make this public statement on our side that we ask you to be engaged into the process and to believe and have patience for that. Thank you. We have treated the statement of the chief of the political office of NATO Sec Gen as a reflection of an internal discourse among the allies. So we were not really thinking bad about Stein. He's a great guy. He's doing a great job. He's not a political person at all. And the format in which and the country in which the discourse, this message has been taken, we have treated it as the reflection of the domestic discourse. And back in a time, Vilnius was pretty relatively not long ago, but long ago in terms of the developments. We think that Germany might have been partially the one who have been talking about that, because when we were talking about membership in NATO, what we heard is that nobody knows how the war will be over. So let's make our reservations. So now the situation is different. It doesn't seem like it was so, but I think it's good that he came out public on that. So I don't think that this kind of discourse is now in place.
Thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister. We are running on a very tight schedule, so I have to close now. And thank you for your intervention today, for being with us and for answering the questions. And thank you, dear audience, and thank you, Ben, and thank you, Anastasia, for this great panel. Thank you. Bye-bye.